Hello, my name is John Michael. This is my assignment 3 rundown. I'm going to show my code and I'm going to talk about step by step. Basically, we're practicing with pandas. Um, First thing first, we were provided with a test.csv file, which basically has all the values that we need. Um, and then we're gonna go step by step on the questions. So first question is download the test.csv file and store in the data frame name mydf. So right now we have a test.csv file. We imported pandas obviously, and then we did .read CSV to read the CSV, and then I did pd.dataframe to store it in a mydf, right? Show the first 5 rows, mydf.head. Basically, the head method calls each row. Sorry, basically the head method calls the first 5 rows. So right here we're showing the first 5 rows. Um, Question 3, does the first row contain the column name? If not, please assign the following column names to them. So right now we don't have any columns names, as you can see from calling the first 5 rows. We do, however, have the first value used as a column name, which is not supposed to happen. We're supposed to have our own column name. This is supposed to be having its own value as index 0, right? So first thing first, we do test equals p.read CSV, calling the CSV file. We know that the first value is not supposed to be a header. We know that the test.csv file has no header currently. So we do header equals none. MyDF equals pd.dataframe. Basically, we're storing the test CSV file in its own value called MyDF and as a data frame. And then we do mydf.columns, which basically creates a whole nother column as ID, range, value, machine type, zip code as asked. But using this basically puts it as its own header. So now we have our own header now. So now we have a header called ID, range, value, machine type, zip code as shown using mydf.head. And now the first row that was a header back then is now its own value as index 0. Question 4, add your name and student number on top of your data set in your local file and show your DF with your name and student as part of the data set. So I locally put my first name, last name, and student ID inside the CSV file and called it test_2.csv. We did the same thing, stored it in my DF and showed it. Now it's showing my name, my last name, and my student ID. But obviously as its own header, but realistically it's its first value of the rows. Question 5. Now use a method to skip the first row and show the DF as it was before adding your information. So we want to skip the first row, which is basically my name, and basically put it back as its original status, which is this, right? Um, its original status has its own column's name and had the first row now, but is now technically our second row as its first row, and we're trying to skip the first row, which is my name. So right now, what I did was test2 read the underscore CSV file, and then basically I called the CSV file. I put header none. Originally there was no header, and skip row equals 1. So basically this basically skips the first row. So we're skipping my name. Um, Stored it as mydf, created the columns again, and now it's back to its original values. Question 6, show the type of your DF. So Python has its own method called type with parentheses, basically showing whatever type you called inside the parentheses. So I called mydf. Basically the type of mydf is a data frame. Question 7, select the value column using 2 different columns. Which one is the object-oriented style? So there's 2 types of calling a specific column. MyDF dot value, basically MyDF dot whatever the column name is, or putting it inside a bracket and quotation mark. So I have MyDF bracket quotation mark and MyDF dot values. Which one's more object oriented? I think the more object oriented would be the second method, putting it into parentheses and brackets. The reasoning is because the first method, you're very limited on what you can do. If a column name has spaces between, like machine type or zip code, you can't call it using this first method. You'd have to call it between the second one. The second method has quotation marks. Whatever you put inside the quotation marks, it'll work, even if it has a space or not. Also, what's also good with the second method is that the second method you can call more than one type. So you can call more than one column. If you were to call my df dot value, you add another dot and try calling another column, it's not gonna work because if you were to add another dot, it would think that you're trying to find something within the values column or you're trying to do something with the value itself. Having the column in parentheses and having doing everything inside the column itself, you have a bunch of variety. So if I did this, let's say machine type, this would still work theoretically, right? Um, so yeah. So in my opinion, I think object oriented would be the second version. Question 8, what type is the selected column? Obviously, the selected column we know is a series value, and we can check by doing the type parentheses, calling the column itself, saying it's a series. Question 9, can we apply both methods for fetching the zip code? Basically, can we apply both these methods but calling the zip code header? No, you cannot. Um, as I said, you can't use the first method for calling a column that has space. You can only use the column, you can only use the method with the quotation marks and the brackets to call a column that has space. Um, which other column has the same status? Obviously, machine type and zip code. They both have spaces between. Um, why can we not use? As I already said, I already explained that. Number 10, create a new series called brand by combining machine type and zip code series. So what I did was basically my df called brand. There is no brand currently, so we want to do my df semicolon quotation brand equals. This would automatically create a whole new column on its own. I want to combine machine type and zip code. So we did the second method, but this time we added it together, causing it to combine. So right here, machine type F, zip code, this zip code. If you look at this not second column, but the last column, it has zip code and machine type combined. Um, question 11 is basically the same thing, but this time instead of brand, you want to call it total. You want to multiply range and value. So we're doing the same thing, but instead of the plus sign, we do the multiply sign, which basically multiplied it. So right here, it's not this. These values are all multiplied by range of value. Question 12 uses the following commands. So the list of commands was mydef.head, right? Shows the first 5 rows. Mydef.describe, okay, it describes everything, right? And then mydef.describe without the parentheses. Mydef.shape, mydef.data types. So the question was, why do some of the parentheses, oh, sorry, why do some of them have parentheses and some don't? What is the difference between B and C? So it's asking basically the describe, right? Why does this describe B have a parentheses and why does this describe C not have any? The reason is because when you have a parentheses, it means you're calling a specific method. You're not calling the method, sorry, there's no, it's not the method itself, you're calling it, right? Um, so the difference between B and C is that B is calling the method and hoping that it returns a specific value. Um, since we were able to call it, it returned this specific value. C, however, doesn't have parentheses, so you're not calling anything. Describe is the method itself. So you're actually just calling the method itself. You're not calling it from somewhere else, which is returning this. So that's the difference between B and C. Um, how can we use the describe method to show the statistics for the objects, not normal columns? So now we're going to use B method with calling the method and using include equals object within the parentheses. That way, we're calling the method and telling the method to do a specific thing using include. And right now, as you can see, it's using the include, so it shows that. Question 14, rename the ID to my ID and my DF, but not changing the original data frame. Show the unchanged data frame by displaying the top 5 rows. So dot rename basically renames anything specifically if you put it inside the parentheses. And between the parentheses, we have columns. So we're calling a specific column. First part, it's your old name, and after the brackets is the new name. So I wanted to change ID into my ID, right? But for some reason, it's not showing. And the reason is because we're not changing the original database. We're changing a temporary, oh, sorry, we're changing the database temporarily. It's not changing it truly. If I were to store this into its value its own and show the value that I stored it in, then it would show. But we're really not changing the original data frame. We're basically making our own data frame and then showing it. Obviously, we didn't store this in any value, so we can't call this own temporary data frame. So what do we do to change that? We use in place. So question 15, same thing, but use in place to show the changes. In place basically means you want to change the original data frame. So basically you do in place equals true. You call the first 5 rows, you can see it's already there, it's changed. Question 16, show the data frame columns. To do that, you just do dot columns. And it also shows the data types. Question 17, change all the column names to ID range, basically this, right? Display the new columns. Um, Basically same thing, but equals, and it'll change the columns right away. Question 18 is the same thing, but instead of a space, we have this. And then question 19 is delete the brand total columns permanently. So to delete the brand, we use dot drop. Okay. We call the brand name. We display what axis, so 1, and then we want it permanently. So you want it to change in the original data frame. So as I said, in place equals true. Question 20, delete row 3 and 5 from the data frame permanently. Same thing, but instead of the name, we do the index 3 and 5, and then changing the axis instead of 1 to 0. Question 21, sort the value series in ascending order. So the way to do this is by default, sort underscore value is always ascending. That's how you sort it. It's always a sorted ascending default. So we do mydf calling the specific column and then dot sort values. Question 22, sort the value series in ascending order showing the whole data frame. Basically here you just gotta change it up. Instead of calling a specific value, you do mydf dot sort value. So you're sorting the data frame itself, but inside the sort method, you put the parentheses. I mean, you put values inside the parentheses. Um, Question 23, do the same thing, but this time we want it in place. So that this means it's permanent. So now we really want to change it permanently. Question 24, um, sort range and value in ascending and descending order. Um, yeah, range in ascending and descending order. Range is ascending, value in descending. So we call the two names here, we call the two column names range and value. And then we do ascending equals true and false. So in that way, we call it in order. Range is going to be true, which means it is going to ascend. Value is going to be false, which is going to descend. And it shows here. Question number 25, display those rows of mydf that their range is between 250 and 350. So you call my data frame, and inside my data frame, you put it in the parentheses mydf.range. Basically, we're calling the range value, but we only want something between 250 and 350. So we do mydf.range is greater or equal to 250 and mydf.range is less than or equal to 350. Question number 26, display those rows of mydf in their range, but in ascending format. As I said, dot sort underscore value is always by default ascending. So all we have to do is the same thing, but call dot sort values and put in between the parentheses the column name, which is range. Um, Question 27, the same thing, but we only want to show ID in value. Putting this right beside mydf will display only ID and value. And as I said, using the second method of calling the columns, you can call more than one column. So we were able to call ID and value, and it shows right here. Question 28, display only the ID value machine type, but this time we want machine type to equal age. So we do same thing, like always, but this time and my df.machine type equals age. So we're trying to say we want the machine type to only equal age while between 350 and 250 in range. And in the same way as your calling. Question 29 is the same thing, but this time the whole entire data frame, but H, R, and X. So we do my data frame machine type equals H or R or X. So this is what you use for or. And we want to show the whole thing, so we don't need to put this beside. And then lastly, show MyDF column data types, display selected only the numerical columns. So MyDF.data types basically shows the data frame data types, right? Which is this. The way we want to show it is by using the method select underscore d types, which means we're selecting a specific data type, but we still need to say what type of data type we want. So inside the parentheses, we put include equals number, and that's what it displays. And that's the whole assignment. Thank you.